The ground beneath California's Central Valley is no longer stable. Not metaphorically, not gradually. It is physically sinking, right now, in measurable and accelerating ways. In some places, the land is dropping so fast that scientists are struggling to explain the speed, and engineers are running out of solutions. What's happening here is not erosion, not an earthquake, and not a temporary shift that will bounce back. This is a collapse of the ground itself, and experts now warn that much of the damage is permanent. This is not a future scenario. This is not a simulation. It is happening today across one of the most important agricultural regions on Earth. In the southern half of California's Central Valley, entire landscapes are settling downward, as if the land has lost its internal structure. Roads are bending, canals are tilting, cities are sinking. In some areas, the surface is dropping by nearly 2 feet every single year. That rate alone has stunned researchers. But what is more alarming is that the process has already crossed a threshold where reversal may no longer be possible. The Central Valley is not just another farming region. It is the backbone of American agriculture. Stretching across roughly 20,000 square miles, this valley produces nearly half of all fruits and vegetables consumed in the United States. It supplies the vast majority of the world's almonds. It grows almost every tomato that ends up in American kitchens. Each year, the region generates more than $17 billion in agricultural output. Millions of lives depend on what comes out of this land. For millions of years, the valley rested on something invisible but essential. Vast underground aquifers filled slowly over time by a snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada mountains. These aquifers acted like an enormous sponge beneath the surface, storing water inside layers of sand, gravel, and clay. As long as that sponge remained saturated, it supported the land above it. But that sponge is now being crushed. For decades, groundwater has been pumped from beneath the valley to sustain industrial-scale agriculture, especially during prolonged droughts. At first, the system appeared resilient. Water levels would drop during dry years, but winter rains and mountain snowmelt allowed the ground to recover. The land would sink slightly, then rebound. That balance no longer exists. In late 2024, researchers at Stanford University released findings that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Using 16 years of satellite data, they measured how much underground space had been lost as the land sank. Since 2006 alone, the Central Valley has lost approximately 14 cubic kilometers of underground volume due to subsidence. To put that into perspective, this amount of collapse nearly equals everything that occurred during the entire 45-year period from 1925 to 1970. Nearly half a century of sinking has been compressed into just 16 years. This time is different because the valley has gone deeper than ever before. Early groundwater pumping targeted shallow layers of sand and gravel. When water was removed from those layers, the land would compress slightly, but could recover once water returned. Today, that shallow water is largely gone. Wells now plunge thousands of feet into the earth, reaching ancient layers of compressed clay that formed over millions of years. These clay layers once held water inside microscopic pore spaces. Those tiny pockets of water acted like invisible support columns, balancing the immense weight of soil, roads, buildings, and cities above. As long as water remained inside those pores, pressure stayed stable. Once that ancient water is removed, everything changes. Without water to hold them open, those pore spaces collapse. The clay compresses permanently, rearranging at a molecular level. According to Stanford researchers, nearly 90% of today's subsidence is coming from these deep clay layers. And unlike sand or gravel, clay does not rebound. Once it collapses, it stays collapsed forever. Imagine crushing an empty aluminum can. You can pour water back into it later, but the space that once existed inside is gone. That is exactly what is happening beneath the Central Valley. Even if rainfall returned to historic levels, even if pumping stopped tomorrow, much of the underground storage capacity would never come back. The container itself has been destroyed. As the ground sinks, it does not sink evenly. It tilts, it warps, it tears itself apart. This uneven movement is devastating infrastructure across the region. Roads buckle into ridges several feet high. Sewer lines snap as gravity no longer carries waste where it's supposed to go. Pipelines twist apart. Foundations crack. Buildings slowly lean. In 2025, the California Department of Water Resources released projections that read less like engineering reports and more like obituaries. California's State Water Project is a 700-mile network of canals, pumping stations, and power plants that supplies water to roughly 27 million people. It was designed with precise slopes that rely on gravity to move water across vast distances. That gravity no longer works the way it should. One of the most striking examples is the Friant-Kern Canal, once considered an engineering marvel. It carried billions of gallons of water southward using nothing but Earth's natural slope. Today, that slope has been compromised. Due to subsidence, the canal has lost more than 60% of its water-carrying capacity. In some sections near the town of Terabella, the ground beneath the canal has dropped more than 4 meters. The slope has actually reversed. Water would now need to flow uphill to pass through. That is physically impossible. What was once a continuous lifeline has become a series of disconnected pools of stagnant water. Nowhere does this crisis feel more real than in Corcoran, California. This city of roughly 22,000 residents sits in one of the fastest sinking areas of the valley. Over the past decade alone, Corcoran has dropped more than 11 feet. That is enough to swallow the first floor of a home. To prevent catastrophic flooding, officials spent more than $20 million raising levees around the city. But the ground beneath those levees is sinking too. Corcoran is slowly turning into a bowl. Bridges that once stood safely above waterways are now so low that floodwaters nearly touch their undersides. These structures no longer function as bridges. They act like dams, trapping water where it does not belong. While public infrastructure tells one story, the most devastating consequences are happening inside homes. More than 4,000 households in the Central Valley have already lost access to water as domestic needs fail. This is where the crisis becomes deeply uneven. Large agricultural corporations drill wells more than 2,000 feet deep using technology borrowed from infrastructure. When these massive pumps activate, they pull groundwater downward across miles, creating what geologists call a cone erosion. For families relying on 300-foot pumps, the effect is sudden and brutal. One day, the water pressure drops. The next day, the faucet spits sand. Soon after, there is nothing at all. A home without water instantly loses its value. Generations of savings disappear overnight. Entire neighborhoods are being hollowed out. Roads are warped beyond repair. Sewer systems no longer function. Communities live under the constant hum of industrial pumps draining what remains underground. This is not a temporary setback. It is a structural collapse. No amount of funding can rebuild a city if the land beneath it continues to vanish. California's final strategy is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which aims to balance aquifer use by the year 2040. But physics does not negotiate with legislation. Stanford forecasts indicate that by 2040, the Central Valley will lose an additional 20 to 30% of its remaining groundwater storage capacity permanently. That represents the irreversible destruction of the largest underground water reservoir in the United States. In practical terms, water availability could drop by nearly 87%. No civilization can survive on 13% of its lifeblood. Few projects reveal this contradiction more clearly than California's high-speed rail. Designed to connect Los Angeles and San Francisco at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, the system demands millimeter-level precision. But in parts of Kings County, the ground is sinking so rapidly that tracks begin warping before the concrete has fully cured. Engineers are now considering adjustable foundations, elevated bridges, and rail systems that can be raised as the land continues to fall. The state is spending more than $100 billion to build a railway on top of a slow-motion collapse. This is not just California's problem. When the Central Valley falters, the consequences ripple across the entire nation. As farmland fails and water disappears, food production drops. Grocery shelves thousands of miles away will feel the impact. Prices will rise. Supply chains will fracture. This is not the loss of a valley. It is the weakening of America's food system. We feared earthquakes. We feared wildfires. We feared rising seas. What we did not expect was the land itself shrinking beneath us. The warped highways, broken canals, and sinking towns of the Central Valley are not anomalies. They are warnings. The ground was never as solid as we believed. As the sun sets over Corcoran and dust hangs in the air, the valley groans under the weight of its own history. Billions of tons of clay compressing into a permanent tomb. The GPS may say the road continues, but the road is already gone. And soon, much of the valley may follow. If you live in a water-stressed region, pay attention to what is happening beneath your feet. Cracked ground, dry wells, buckled roads. These are not isolated failures. They are symptoms of a system pushed beyond its limits. The question is no longer whether the Central Valley can return to what it was. The question is whether we are watching the early stages of a collapse that will redefine how and where civilization can exist in the American West. And this time, the warning is coming from the ground itself.